Well, welcome to a special episode of Civically Minded on Eschatology Matters. Let me get William Wolfe in here. Okay, let me get William Wolfe back in here. My apologies, William. Let me actually add you. This is why I don't like doing this stuff live. It's going to make me look stupid, but that's all right. I am rather stupid, so
it's my fault, man.
No, you're fine. You're fine, sir.
This crowd, you'll look pretty smart.
All right. We'll try to get you looking like the rest of the guys here. Okay. There we go. Look at that. It only took me a second. Well, welcome to a special episode of Civically Minded on Eschatology Matters and a special live stream event discussing the Southern Baptist Convention and its apparent lack of financial transparency. I'm your host, Corey Wing, and I'm joined by an incredible panel of powerhouse Southern Baptist pastors and leaders. Each of these men have worked tirelessly for the kingdom of Christ, and they all desire to see the SBC restored to being the biblically faithful and financially responsible entity that it once was. But before I get ahead of myself, let me introduce my guest. Pastor Tom Ascol has served at Grace Baptist Church in Cape Coral, Florida since 1986. He's also the president of Founders Ministry and the Institute of Public Theology. He has served as an adjunct professor of theology for various colleges and seminaries and has written hundreds of articles for various journals and magazines. Tom regularly preaches and lectures at various conferences throughout the United States and other countries. In addition, he hosts a weekly podcast called The Sword and the Trowel. He has a BS degree in sociology from Texas A&M University and an MDiv and PhD from Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. William Wolfe is the founder and executive director of the Center for Baptist Leadership. He has been a part of the Southern Baptist Convention for 13 years, and after spending a decade living and working in Washington, D.C., including working for 3 different members of Congress and as a director at the State Department and a Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense at the DoD, William completed his seminary training and decided to combine his experience in public policy and political strategy with his theological education and knowledge of the SBC, creating the Center for Baptist Leadership. He has a BA in history from Covenant College and an MDiv from Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Kentucky. Pastor Tom Buck has been at First Baptist Church in Lindale, Texas since 2006. He previously served as the senior pastor of Riverside Baptist Fellowship in Florida, a position that he held for 12 years. He's a graduate of the Moody Bible Institute in Pastoral Ministries and New Testament Greek, and he has a THM from Dallas Theological Seminary in Bible Exposition. He also has a doctorate of ministry in expository preaching from Southern Baptist Theological Seminary as well. And of course, Pastor Jeff Wright has served as the pastor of Midway Baptist Church in Cookeville, Tennessee since 2011. He holds a Master of Arts in Religion from Liberty Baptist Theological Seminary, and his vocational ministry is aimed at maturing Christians in healthy churches and making disciples for the good of their neighbors and the glory of Christ. In addition to his church service, he has worked in classical Christian education as an adjunct professor of hermeneutics at Bryan College in Dayton, Tennessee. I want to say welcome to each of you men, and thank you for coming on tonight to discuss what is honestly a difficult and unbelievable topic regarding the Southern Baptist Convention. Now, it may seem odd that for those of you that might know me, I'm an elder in the PCA, and why would a guy like me be hosting such a discussion as this? But I told these 4 men privately offline that I grew up in the SBC. My older brother's a pastor in the SBC, my younger brother a deacon, and my father was also a deacon in an SBC church for 30 years before he went to glory. Aside from my wife, myself, and our kids, everyone else in my family still remains in the SBC. Some, as I said, even holding office. But I also have a passion for the SBC because it's the largest Protestant evangelical denomination in America. And if you don't understand that, let me put some context to it. They have nearly 47,000 cooperating churches. They have weekly attendance over 4 million and membership almost at 13 million. They have more than 3,500 overseas missionaries and almost 3,000 U.S.-based mission workers. It is safe to say that the SBC is a bellwether for American Christianity. And that doesn't even scratch the surface of the impact that the SBC and the network of seminaries they hold has on the training and educating of, I'll be honest, a vast majority of all U.S. evangelical pastors, regardless of denomination. My own pastor earned his doctorate at an SBC seminary. So regardless of where you call church home, the SBC impacts you. So join us tonight as we discuss how we can restore this wonderful denomination back to being scandal-free, biblically faithful, and strong, because that's what's best for America in general. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Pastor Ascol, I think I want to start with you because so many know Founders Ministry, and of course your longstanding ministry among just not only the SBC, just you're kind of many of you are, in fairness, a staple in the Baptist community. So my first question, Pastor Ascol, is for you. How in the world did we get here? I think a lot of people who are aware of some of this, they don't even understand how any of this happened. So how did we get to the place we find ourselves tonight?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure I understand it fully myself. I do know that we wonderfully saw God work in the latter quarter of the 20th century to restore the Southern Baptist Convention to a conservative heritage. And that is largely regarded by many of us in the conservative wing of the SBC as the conservative resurgence. And we saw our seminaries, our institutions and agencies purged from those who were pretending to uphold the authority of Scripture when in reality they were undermining it. And so, by God's grace, over those decades, we saw our seminaries being led by men who affirm the inerrancy and infallibility of Scripture, and those teaching in our seminary the same things, those leading our denominational entities also having those same convictions. And I can just say for myself that once that battle seemed to be pretty firmly in hand and conservatives were at the helm of our institutions and agencies, I just kind of went back to being a pastor, and I was satisfied with the ones who were leading us and believed that, they were kind of the watchmen on the wall. I had plenty to do as a pastor. And it wasn't until probably 2016, 17 that people began to bug me saying, what do you think about this going on in our seminary? What about that? And I just didn't pay much attention. I thought if we really have problems, we got other guys a lot smarter than me that will be sounding the alarm. And when I began to talk to some of those guys and realize, wait a minute, they're not seeing what I'm seeing, about 2018 or before, it dawned on me, no, 2017, summer of 2017, it dawned on me, we got problems. We're not going to be helped by the guys that I've been trusting to help us. And so I need to start trying to get up to speed on things. So I think the culture just overwhelmed us, and those who were leaders fell asleep at the wheel. And today I look back and say they largely failed us. And it's sad to me to say that, but I believe failed leadership is certainly at the top of the list of how we got here.
Now, I grew up, as I said, in this denomination. So you're talking, and I'll be 47 in about 3 or 4 weeks. So I was a little boy when much of what you're discussing was going on. So you're talking people like Adrian Rogers, correct? And other men. Who were some of the big key players that were involved in the conservative resurgence? You're talking to the very late 70s and the early 80s, correct?
Yeah, it'd be Adrian Rogers, Paige Patterson, Paul Pressler, Russell Camerling. There were others as well, but Paige Patterson and Adrian Rogers were probably two of the foremost leaders. Charles Stanley, Bailey Smith, all of those men were involved as well.
Well, and I grew up at a what is now a pretty large church just outside of Charlotte, and they had the Bailey Smith Crusade every year. It was part of the warp and woof of growing up in that particular church, and so it was an amazing thing to see as all of that kind of came to the forefront. And then my older brother, who is a ordained pastor in your denomination, and even many years ago when he went off to college, I remember him telling me something's wrong. And they started. He started coming home with stories, and I'm 3 years younger than him, so I was still in high school, and so this would go back to the mid '90s, late '90s, and he would come back and say they're starting to teach us about the critical view of Scripture, and things that quite honestly don't make sense. I don't understand why we're getting fed this stuff. So, William, I'm being told that you're not on screen. Let me try to fix this. My apologies, my friend. Let me see if I can add you back to stage and see if that helps. Because you're showing up on mine, so I don't know why you're not showing up in the stream. My apologies, sir.
If I say something, does it bring me up?
It does not. So let me.
You want me to leave and come back? I can leave and there it is.
Are you on now?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So my apologies for that, gentlemen. But so I was a boy when much of Pastor Ascol, much of what you're talking about was happening. And again, I think what you said is so true across the board. Whether you're talking denominationally, I think we as Americans have seen it politically. Christians especially have this mentality that things seem to be righting themselves. We've corrected the mission drift, and I'm going to go back to raising my kids and pastoring my church and doing all of the things that God's called me to do. And I'm going to trust that the guys that we put at the helm are going to just keep doing what we put them there to do. And sadly, what you just iterated about the SBC, we've seen rinsed and repeated everywhere else. Again, I'm in the PCA, and this could easily be 4 of us from the PCA and 1 of you hosting and us talking about side B theology and the revoice movement, or quite honestly, because I know William I saw him tweet about this some over the weekend. What just happened over the weekend with one of our teaching elders going back and forth with Megan Basham about some segregated, lunch or service or something. So we have. Please don't let me paint the picture that the PCA has it all figured out. And so that's why I thought I'd come and pick on the SBC. Lord knows we have our own problems. And I would beg that you men in whatever spare moments you have, pray for us too. But it is amazing how this does end up being endemic across all denominations. Well, William, I would like to move down to you if that's okay, as with something that really is so glaringly apparent in this when we talk about the financial transparency or lack thereof. And I think one of the major reasons that you started the organization you started is, and I don't mean this particular instance, but I use this as a great example of what's going on. Former SBC president and longtime pastor of First Baptist Church, Woodstock, Georgia, Johnny Hunt, who I just read supposedly has a new trial date for his nearly 2-year-old lawsuit against the SBC and, of course, against Guidepost Solutions, which for those of you who may not know what that is, that's the company that was hired to seek out sexual abuse violations within the ranks of the SBC, and they were hired by the SBC to help kind of suss all that out. Well, he is now sued, or he did actually back in about 2 years ago. He sued the SBC and Guidepost Solutions for roughly $100 million. And they say that that's now about a week after your convention this year is going to finally go to trial. Is that some of what we're talking about when we say there's financial problems in the SBC?
Well, yeah, absolutely. And just to check, can you guys hear me? All right.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's just one example. Let's break that down. I'd say there's 2 things at play here with the Hunt lawsuit. First of all, is the question of what was Hunt's compensation as an executive at the North American Mission Board? Was it reasonable? Was it a fair number according to the work he was doing for them and in line with their mission priorities? Is this something that all Southern Baptists, if we knew, we'd be happy to say, yes, Johnny Hunt is worth approximately $600,000 a year? The problem is we don't have any way of measuring that because we don't know what the trustees are doing and how they're evaluating the work going on at NAM. We have no idea what Ascol is making. And of course, that number is not, his salary, but it's also speaking honorariums and things like that. So maybe Hunt was worth that, maybe not. That's the question of, the dollars and the cents and the objectives and the mission. The other thing at play here is that Hunt was named as a sexual abuser, as somebody who committed the act of sexual abuse, a crime and a sin, along with other people in this Guidepost Solutions report that the Southern Baptist Convention executive committee indemnified guidepost. They essentially said, you can name anybody, you can call anybody anything, and if you're wrong about it, we'll take the fall for it. And so certain people like Johnny Hunt said, yes, I've sinned, I've committed adultery, I've violated the trust placed in me as a pastor, as a Christian leader, but I did not commit sexual abuse. I didn't commit a crime. And so I'm going to sue you for defaming me and slandering me in this way. And there's other people who are suing the Southern Baptist Convention over that as well. So we have lack of transparency, and then some completely boneheaded mismanagement of the fiduciary responsibilities of the executive committee of the Southern Baptist Convention that's led to this issue.
There's a lot to unpack there. I was on a live space that you did with some of these same men just about a week ago, William. And one of the things I commented in the comments there was, I don't think this is what Southern Baptist, housewives and grandmothers I don't think this is why they're giving their offerings and their tithes, is so that, men that had sexual improprieties or not, quite honestly, or guidepost solutions. So any of those things could get paid off. I mean, so, and you kind of said, would they be happy if they all learned that Johnny Hunt was making roughly $600,000 a year as an employee of NAM? So could you kind of, any of you can jump in on this one and tell me, you all pastor, the three of you certainly pastor churches, and William, you've been in the SBC for a long time. Is this something that, anyone at any of your churches that would go, yeah, that's what I signed up for?
No,
Absolutely
and
not.
certainly not signing up for the lack of knowing what our entity employees are being paid. Even if you can make an argument that he's worth a salary, nobody signs up to be kept in the dark on these kind of financial matters.
Can I say something else on that?
Please.
Okay. So I do not think the vast majority of Southern Baptist churches and givers have signed up to create a system for essentially church planting consultants, where they can go around making tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, advising people on how to plant churches and grow their churches. Many of these people who aren't even pastoring churches themselves. I'm not a pastor. I'm just a faithful lay, member at a Southern Baptist church. And imagine if I started going around and telling everybody how to do church plants and pitched myself as a church plant consultant and said, give me tens of thousands of dollars. That's essentially what NAM has become through the Send Network in many ways. It's essentially a grift for a church planting consultant class, and nobody signed up for that.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I've read things over the last few years that not only is it a money grift, but that especially out in the Northwest and areas like that of the country, they're opening, quote, churches that have no resemblance to anything that again, people maybe on this panel or even myself growing up in one would think looks anything like a traditional SBC church. Is that also true?
Yeah, Tom Buck's your guy on that one, man. He has been a terror to North American Mission Board exposing this very issue.
Pastor Buck, please take the floor.
I would say that for sure. Let me say this, that the churches that would look more like a Southern Baptist church, because I've talked to multiple NAM church planters, they get the least amount of money. And then the guys that they consider to be, doing we might use the term, sexy job, where they're in particular areas or doing something that's a little more edgy or whatever it may be, they get more money. So I've talked to these guys who are frustrated. They're like, "Hey, we're just trying to do the work of the work of the Lord, and we look more like a traditional Southern Baptist church, and NAM doesn't get excited about us because we're not sexy enough for them." While they're paying big money, I doubt that Johnny Hunt's too far off from the number that he gave, especially if he's going to go to court and have to prove that. Um, and then, of course, you have all the churches in the Northwest and in California that have been filled with women preachers, women who preach, women who had the title pastor. Now they've removed it. And whenever we would expose it, they would keep the same job description, which was elder-esque, but yet they would then drop the title of pastor. It was just a word game. It was a shell game that they were moving things around. And that's a fact. I mean, I've given so much evidence publicly on that. try to deal with it privately. And I think that's one of the biggest problems that all the men here have is people make mistakes. You can't have a big entity as large as NAM and there not be something happen that's a mistake, right? So we're not looking to fry somebody for every single mistake that occurs. But the problem is that there's no transparency even on that. When I would email them, I would get the runaround. Kevin Azell would even once said that I just had a heart problem when because I would continue to ask questions about things. He said that in an email to me. Um, and then he would tell me one thing, and then I'd find out that there was something totally different that was taking place and going on. It's just sad to see that we cannot get straight answers from our entity heads. So it's not just financial; it's just in the practice, and they don't repent. Just come out and say, "Hey, I made a mistake." One of the things I said to Kevin Azell on the phone one day, I said, "I'd like to know," and I said, "if I were in your position as the president of NAM, I would be asking my guys, how come a little country preacher in East Texas of a small church knows more about what's going on in NAM churches than I do, and I'm the president?" I said, I'd be wanting to know that. And his response to me is this: "Yeah, that's a good question," but never would get down to the heart of things.
Well, so that leads to something that happened last year in Indianapolis. Saddleback Church, of course, was disfellowshipped and was somewhat a sacrificial lamb for this very type of topic, correct? I mean, they were ordaining females. Can you walk the audience through some of what happened there and kind of how all that came to a head?
Let Tom, you probably know that as well as I do.
Well, yeah, I mean, Rick Warren, when we were out in California for the annual meeting, held court on the floor of the Southern Baptist Convention and claimed that he had trained more pastors than the Apostle Paul and the SBC combined, or something like that. I forget the details, but anyway, 1 million men or something like that, that are people, not just men, for pastoral ministry, and he'd been faithful Southern Baptist and yada yada. So the that was his appeal to not have his church dealt with. And I think that was the year it was famously said, with the committee that was studying this, we don't know what a pastor is, so we don't know how to handle this. Well, they got embarrassed sufficiently enough that the next year everyone was pretty convinced that whatever a pastor is or isn't shouldn't be a woman. And so they were brought up to be removed. And in Indianapolis, that did happen. But it was everybody talks about, oh, look how the conservatives handled this. Look, anybody could have given a speech and Saddleback was going to be removed because they had so flagrantly just in the face of the SBC and everybody else. Rick Warren stands up and says, I was wrong. I realized that women can be ordained, and they just very famously ordained, I think it was 3 women to be pastors. So yeah, that was I mean, it was important to remove them because it did signal that, yeah, we're not going to tolerate this. But on the other hand, it was not the kind of cases that Tom Buck has been uncovering, that once they were brought to light, people began to shuffle and change titles and change their websites in hopes that nobody else will notice. So I don't put a lot of stock in that.
Well, and the big story was really not Rick Warren. The big story is the one that nobody really talked about, and that was the other church that had the female
That's
pastor
right.
that was in Kentucky.
Fern
I
Creek.
can't remember what her name was or the church's name, but they
Fern
they were
Creek.
disfellowshipped at the same time. And she comes on the floor. The most important question at that convention was made by her on the floor. Why now?
Mm.
She
Hmm.
asked that question. That's the question of that convention, a particular, I should say, gathering. And so she was not too far from Louisville. So they knew that was going on. Paul Chitwood had preached in her church while she was pastor. Now, I've talked to Paul about this. This was when he was not when he was with IMB, but when he was over the Kentucky um, Association of the state. And so they knew it was going on. He had preached there. Al Mohler knew it was going on. He knew they were down the street. But yet in 2019, I sat in a room with several other men. Uh, Albert Mohler was there. Danny Aiken was there. And we addressed the very issue and the problem with women preachers. And Dr. Mohler looked at us and said, there is no problem with women preachers in the SBC. There's probably some people sitting here that could confirm that I'm telling the truth on that. And he then proceeded to say, that we were giving him evidence, and he was just ignoring it. It was just a week later that Beth Moore did her famous Mother Day sermon, and Dr. Moeller went on Twitter shocked, that, and she said something about Honeycutt, Dr. Honeycutt. Tom, you probably remember this. And Dr. Moeller went on and said, I never thought I'd see the day. Well, we had told him the day's already here 2 weeks earlier. So, and I don't mean to smack him down. It's just we've been failed by our leadership from Dr. Moeller all the way down. I love Dr. Moeller, respect him. He's one of the reasons I stayed in the SBC, because I came out of DTS in 1993. I was wondering if I was going to stay in the SBC because I'd grown up in it. Dr. Moeller becomes president of Southern, and that gave me hope. And so I respect these men. I love these men. But we have been failed because they have not. I remember specifically saying to Dr. Moeller, you're a general. We're your soldiers on the front line, and we're coming and reporting to you what's taking place, and we need you to hear what's taking place. And that was in 2019. So we went from 2019 to 2024, right? And when Saddleback happens, for 5 years, showing him and others in the SBC that NAM was a problem and these other things. They don't deal with anything until they have no other choice to deal with it, until it's a politically inconvenient for them to not deal with it.
Wow. And again, just because I know this is a mixed audience, I'm already getting some feedback as far as who's watching, and it's not all Baptist. Explain for those who may not know who some of those names are. So Danny Aiken and some of those gentlemen, what positions do these men hold, and at what institutions do they hold it?
Danny Aiken's the president of Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary. Dr. Moeller's the president of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Kentucky. And Dr. Aiken is what's the city that he's in? Is it
Wake Forest.
Wake Forest. So Wake Forest, North Carolina. So those are the two individuals I was speaking of.
Okay. Thank you so much. Jeff, it's your turn, buddy. And I say buddy because we've of the 4 men on screen, you and I've spoke before. So thank you for coming back on and being able. I didn't run you off sufficiently, apparently. So Pastor Wright, you were actually part of what's known as the ERLC, Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, at one point in time, correct?
Yeah, I was on this thing called the Leadership Committee, which when I went on it, I thought was more than it actually is. It was basically a fundraising group. They wanted you to write big checks to the ERLC, and then you would get to sit in on their meetings and feel like you were really getting access to really important people. It was a joke, but I was there.
So you have went from that, and I mean, I can still find you, or anyone can still find you online when they look up your name on an ERLC website. And, so you've went from that to now being a very outspoken champion of the kind of reform movement that we're talking about this evening, which for some folks even includes shutting down the ERLC completely, right? I mean, that's been propositioned as a resolution, has it not?
Absolutely. It's usually manipulated down by the people on the platform who can kind of control the mics and the way the room moves at the annual meeting. But yeah, I mean, that has been the mood of Southern Baptists, at least grassroots Southern Baptists, for a better part of a decade. And it just completely, it just continually shows that it's needed. The ERLC is useless. They're less than vestigial. Williams Center for Baptist Leadership is a fairly new organization, has done much more to advance the cause of like actual Southern Baptist interests in the public policy arena in just the time that it's been around than the ERLC has done for years. When the ERLC does something, they create a catastrophe. They kill an abortion bill in Louisiana. They ignore the Vanderbilt transgender clinic in their backyard. Brent Leatherwood gives his time to covering up the school shooting motivations at Covenant School in Nashville. They can't move without making a catastrophic error. They're a huge waste of money. And again, as I just said, a volunteer organization like William leads within a very short time shows that we actually could do something positive, but we have to work around them because they're so inept. We have better alternatives. We should put our money into better alternatives.
Now, you bring up Brent Leatherwood. He's currently the person running the helm at the RLC. Prior to him, another name that some of the viewers certainly will be familiar with, who is now at Christianity Today, is of course Russell Moore. Correct? He ran the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission prior to Brent Leatherwood. Is that correct?
He did. He ran it into the ground. And there is some evidence that in some ways he's kind of running the RLC by wire, or at least was initially through Brent Leatherwood. He was Leatherwood was salvaged from being dismissed by the Tennessee GOP for undermining incumbent candidates who weren't, to his liking. And so this is a guy who's always been a subversive, but he failed forward, landed at the number 2 man spot in the ERLC eventually, and basically got the job because Dr. Moore had made it so toxic. No one wanted the job. And Brent Leatherwood doesn't have prospects outside of the one that he's already holding. And so he just was kind of by default left there. Again, I think there's some evidence that at least early on Moore was running it by wire through him. But this is the kind of leadership we have at the ERLC. We're getting what you would expect from a group with that kind of leadership. And this is why Southern Baptists are ready to see the whole thing wrapped up.
Yeah. So I know that John Harris, who of course does Conversations That Matter, he's been pretty, and he's not even in the SBC, but he's been very outspoken, and he's talked with a number of you on screen, and of course helped put out a film or documentary just a couple of years ago called Enemies Within the Church that again touched on so much of this. So I feel like, how can anyone at this point not know that this is going on? But sadly, I see it, and I talk to people both within your denomination and outside of it that still don't know this is going on. So could one of you explain to me how, with all of this exposure, there's still such an unbelievable smoke and mirror that keeps happening, and this is obscured down the line?
Gentlemen, you mind if I take a run at that first? Here's what I'm going to tell you, Corey, that I think most people still aren't aware of. So many of our Baptist leaders or people in the pipeline are paid not to notice. The North American Mission Board retains them on these ambassador type deals. They're supposed to be consultants in the work. And so what our mission dollars are going to do is to buy these people who specifically are working to say, oh, we will not notice anything that's going wrong. And so the reason a lot of people don't know about it is because our domestic mission board has paid them to not let people know about it. And they're happy to take the paycheck to do that. Now, having that on the record, I'll throw it back to the panel, because I'm sure they have other reasons.
I would say part of what Tom said earlier, and that is pastors are busy. They're busy serving their congregation, preaching the gospel. I was the same way. I mean, I did the same thing Tom did. I didn't go to a lot of even convention meetings. I was worse than Tom. I think Tom went to annual meetings every year. I wasn't even going to annual meetings. I just trusted the leadership to do that. And so, we're busy counseling, preaching, discipling, sometimes sadly disciplining. We're busy, and that's a good thing. And so I was oblivious to most of this until it just kind of was thrown into my face. So I've been, bombarded by a lot of, people saying, why don't you go back and pastor your church? Well, I was doing that. And look at the mess you got us into. So I'd love to do that. There would be nothing that would give me greater joy than to have to stop talking about this stuff. And but as I told Tom the other day, you can barely talk about one crisis before another one pops up. But most pastors, they're not on Twitter, they're not on X, they're not on social media. They're just loving their congregation, serving their church, and they believe what they're being fed.
Right.
And that's what, Jeff is talking about. The people that are paid not to notice are also paid to tell other people everything's fine. There's no problem. We're your conservatives. You can, we believe the Bible's inerrant. If I hear that one more time, I think I want to vomit. Not from the wrong perspective, right? I believe it's inerrant too. But they act like that's the magic word to not, don't look behind the curtain. Don't pay attention to the man behind the curtain, because everything is fine. And we Southern Baptists want to believe their leaders. I want to believe my leaders. They're loyal people. Look at what they give to the cooperative program and to the other institutions, because they love the Lord. They love missions. They trust their leadership. That's it. That's a positive thing when you have good people at the helm that are doing the work well and protecting the people. But when that doesn't happen, it's a lot like you don't know you have bad policy until you have a problem, and you don't know you have bad leaders until you find out that now you're $13 million in debt and going to be quicker and quicker.
Yeah, I would
Corey,
underscore that.
go ahead.
It's failed leadership again, because at any point along this process over the last 8-9 years, one or two key leaders in the SBC could have stood up and said, wait a minute, this is bad. We need to stop this. And it would have been stopped. There would have been enough normal, regular, salt of the earth pastors, church members like us who would have followed them to do that. And some of those leaders intimated they would do exactly that. And when the moment came, made decisions not to do that. And so it's leadership. It's a failed leadership. You've got the heads of the entities who have remained silent or tried to say, oh, everything's fine. You've got folks who raise questions being pigeonholed as what Brent Leatherwood called us recently, grievance grifters. So we're always complaining, always pointing out problems. And we're told, well, trust the trustees. We have trustees over all of our entities, and they're the ones taking charge. Well, the trustees don't know what's going on. We've heard that time and again. Trustees saying, I don't know what our entity head makes in terms of his salary. We didn't know this. We weren't informed. The trustee system is broken because the trustees are being trained by the entities that they're supposed to be holding in trust for the churches, and they become unpaid public relations departments for these entities. So the one main reason is our leaders have failed us. They have failed us. I love these men too. I've known some of them for decades, and yet they have failed us. They have allowed this mess to happen, and they're hoping people will forget. They're hoping people will forget the things that they said. For example, when the sex abuse task force was initiated, and we had every leader in the SBC, almost without exception, come out saying, we must do this. Oh, we must do this. We have an epidemic of sex abuse in the convention. This must be studied. And now here we are paying the bills a few years later and discovering, what was it, over 6 years, 7 churches or something like that. There's no epidemic in the SBC, never was, because of the nature of our polity, because of the quality of our churches and pastors. We hadn't done anything perfectly. 47,000 churches, and 7 of them over the last several years that have been discovered by the very people that have run us into debt now to try to figure this out. The world ought to be coming to us and asking us, hey, guys, how have you handled sex abuse in your churches, in the convention? Because God, though we've not been perfect, we have done better than the public education system, the governmental systems, and just about anything else that you want to hold up by comparison.
Well, thank you for that. William, go ahead.
Yeah, let me try to bring together like a couple of different of these strands and kind of bring it a little bit back to just the overall question of transparency. So first, a verse I want to read is from Judges 2:10. And all that generation also were gathered to their fathers, and there arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord or the work that he had done for Israel. So, one, we've had a generational change in the Southern Baptist Convention, right? We had a generation of faithful leaders who brought the convention back, and now we are in the next generation, and it's every generation's responsibility to fight for faithfulness, and this generation has sort of failed. 2, the trustee system is broken, and it got broken, and nobody noticed that it was broken. Over probably a decade or so there, the trustee boards during a peacetime, right? We were in a peacetime, morphed from entities that were responsible for holding organizations responsible for holding our entities accountable into PR cheerleaders for them. I was just recently speaking with an older brother at my church. This man was an incredibly accomplished individual in the private sector. He's been on plenty of boards. He worked in the healthcare industry. He said, when a trustee board gets together, they have one question and one question only. Is the chief executive officer fulfilling his mission for this organization and fulfilling the fiduciary responsibility that this organization has to its shareholders? And if not, then can we fix it? And if we can't fix it, we need to find a new leader. Somewhere along the lines over the last 2 decades in the SBC, our trustee boards quit doing that and became cheerleaders instead of an accountability mechanism. And nobody noticed that it's happening. Third is that as the generation change happened and the trustee boards got broken in terms of the good governance in the Southern Baptist Convention, false ideologies, unbiblical ideologies, worldly ideologies crept in during this explosion of liberalism, identity politics, and wokeness. This generation of SBC leaders really got bought into this idea of trying to win the world by sort of repackaging the world to the world with Christian content sort of sprinkled on top. And so I'd say that, and so now we realize where it gets you, right? It gets you DEI hires and woke nonsense and women pastors and racial grievance. But because the trustee system was broken, we had no way of effectively dealing with it until, as Tom have said, outside individuals and organizations bring an issue to the point where it cannot be ignored. If the trustee system was working, these things would be caught and dealt with in-house, and maybe we would never even know about it unless there was a sort of, hey, we got to fire this guy because he wouldn't get in line. So that's sort of the 3 points I try to bring everything together with is 1, a generational handoff that was dropped, 2, a trustee system that got broken. And because that trustee system was broken, worldly ideologies, woke ideologies, and liberalism were able to infect the Southern Baptist Convention.
And there are trustees, and I think William would agree with this as well. There are trustees, they're good trustees that want there to be transparency, that want there to, but they'll tell you that they're the minority and they can't get anything done because of the guys that they're like that. So we've got some good trustees. The problem is they get their hands are tied because they can't find anybody that will stand up with them to say, let's do the right thing here. And I've talked to multiple trustees. I talked the other day with a NAM representative, and I said, "You all," they said, "Well, we can't tell everything." They said, "Do you tell your church everything?" I said, "Yeah, we do." And it's shocking to me that they don't think that they find it hard to believe that people do that. And I shared with him, that trust is the foundation of any leadership. Transparency is the foundation of trust. And you have to have that. But they have decided that the price of secrecy is better than the price of transparency. And the problem I shared with him about the price of secrecy is that you pay a high price. You often don't know the price you're paying. But all your sycophants, they're going to be fine with the prices. They're fine with you. But reasonable people that are not going to be with you, and they're not going to follow you. If they're transparent and they tell us what Kevin Ezell's making, yes, are there going to be some Southern Baptists that go, well, I don't make that, and I don't think he should make that? Of course, there are people that'll be like that. But reasonable people will know it's a big organization. We expect it to be a big price tag. We should know that total package is going to be like that. So if they came back and told me total package was $500,000, I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be. Because when you look at an organization that big, whether I agree with it or not is one thing, but I'm not going to necessarily be surprised, and I'm probably not going to nitpick over that to one degree or another. But when you decide to live in the realm of secrecy, you have speculation, you have all those other things. They blame us for the problem they're creating.
Wow.
Yeah, I want to say something else on that real quick too, Corey, which is it's not just about one CEO's compensation, right? There's so much more at play here. So let me just rattle off a couple of the VPs we have at NAM in particular, right? So we've got Kevin Ezell, who runs NAM, but then we've got Vance Pittman, who's the president of Send Network. And then we have Travis Ogle, who's the executive VP of Send Network. Then we have Brian Bloy, who's the VP of Strategies and Development. Then we have Matt Carter, who's the VP of mobilization. Then we have Brian Loritz, the VP of regions. Then we have Tony Merida, the VP of planner development. Noah Oldham, executive director of Send Network. I mean, so once you start bundling all these people together, it's not just about Kevin Ezel's total compensation package. It's like, why do we have 10 VPs and executive directors between NAM and Send Network alone? What's all that total compensation looking like? And then it's not just what we're paying them in terms of salary and compensation. It would be great to know how many NAM church plants have become solvent over the last 10 years that are actually faithful to the Baptist faith and message. And you know what? Just if you could indulge me and humor this Baptist, do we actually even have Baptist in the name of the church? Right? So it's like on top of the money, it's like, are we actually planting Baptist churches that can stay solvent over time and are behaving like Baptist churches? We have no idea.
Jeff, you're champing at the bit there, buddy. Go ahead.
Well, the one thing I want to note there is as William runs that list off, Southern Baptists who've been in the Southern Baptist Convention for a while will also notice that there's a lot of family names connected to those VP positions. And so you start realizing that there's a lot of nepotism in the SBC as well, and it becomes a way of increasing family wealth. And that's also why there's such an appetite to keep things hidden, because there's multiple generations who are taking from the dole. A friend asked me recently, how did the SBC get to this point? And I said, this is the nature of cooperatives. They're often corrupted because they stop being about the thing that they were formed to cooperate to accomplish and start becoming about the advancement of the individuals who are in leadership positions. I've seen this in agricultural co-ops. It's very much true about the SBC. And as William's reading off that list, you start realizing that we sound like the Habsburgs. We're a very inbred denomination at the leadership level, because it's children being handed not just roles, but substantial salaries and things like that, substantial titles by their fathers, who are setting their children up as some sort of family investment. And once you start scratching at a few of those things, once you get a little bit of detail that will allow you to do that, you start seeing it's pretty compromised from every angle.
William, you came from Washington, D.C. You left the swamp, as it's affectionately or not so affectionately called, to come and what it's sounding increasingly like is to wade into a different swamp. And so what in your past and now your present role are you seeing that looks just identical? What are you seeing that maybe is different? And with your unique perspective of your time in government, do you have hope that this can, I mean, other than, of course, our hope is in Christ, and again, he is the head of the church. But aside from supernatural intervention, can this be fixed?
Well, yeah. So the answer is yes, it absolutely can be fixed. And the way that we fix it is the same way in many ways that you would fix something in Washington, D.C., because the overlap is incredibly similar. I'm very conservative. When I worked in Washington, D.C., from the drop, I was part of like the conservative agitating Tea Party wing, right? I worked for guys like Dave Bratt and then Heritage Action. And, this was during the heyday when John Boehner had been swept into office as the Speaker of the House on the Tea Party wave in reaction to Obama. And then just along with people like McCarthy and Cantor and Paul Ryan, and they just immediately started betraying the base, right? So in DC, in the Republican Party, and you get some similar things in the Democrat Party. And what it fundamentally is you have an elite managerial class that has been matriculated into power or has gotten power, and then they work to preserve their own parochial interests while they're in power over and against the interests of the constituents who sent them there. And the same dynamic has absolutely happened in the Southern Baptist Convention. We have a clear battle between essentially the grassroots Southern Baptists and the elites. The elites are stewarding and managing a system for their own benefit as much as they possibly can, and then trying to tell the grassroots that everything is okay. So in the last, decade in politics, one of the biggest changes that we have ever seen is the grassroots Republican reaction to the failures of the establishment and the selection of Donald Trump in 2016 and onward. And now Donald Trump, back in his second term, is finally sort of smashing this system. So the solution in the Southern Baptist Convention, and here I appreciate this question because, you know, people love to say, oh, you're bringing politics into the church, into the SBC. Well, brothers, what do you call an organization that has, you know, 40,000 churches? It's a political organization, right? It's a cooperative program. The way you organize yourself is through a body politic. Robert's Rules of Orders on our floor at the annual meeting. What we have is a massive disengagement from the grassroots. And I will say this, like, this is the pathway. It's the same thing they did in the conservative resurgence. My hope for the next, I'd say 5 years, I'm kind of giving myself a benchmark here, 5 years. If over the next 5 years, we really cannot get the grassroots Southern Baptist churches re-engaged in the convention, then maybe I will throw the white flag. Because that's what it's going to take. It's going to take sort of this massive re-engagement from Southern Baptist churches to do the work of coming to the convention and holding these people accountable. We will meet in Dallas in June. If 10,000 more messengers showed up, we could fix everything with just overwhelming votes over and over. We could enact our will on the Southern Baptist Convention if these people came. But the problem is they're not coming. So how do we get them to come? That is the we'll say $610,000 question for solving the Southern Baptist Convention.
Well, one other difference, William, is that our government, who has been clearly abusing and misspending our money, right? That's been made clear by Doge. They're using tax dollars. The SBC is using their tithe dollars. They're taking money from honest to goodness, sweet little old widows in my church. I'm not just, they are, who are sitting there and writing checks and giving to the Lord. They're taking the Lord's money and acting like they own it. It's bad enough when a government leader takes our tax dollars and acts like they own it. It's worse when a leader of a religious convention, the largest Protestant denomination in America, takes dollars that people are giving in gifts to the Lord and act like it's theirs.
Yeah, buys box seats at baseball games and hands out unable to be counted pieces of swag to make everybody feel good about being part of the club.
Well, didn't NAM stay at the Ritz in New Orleans or something like that? Wasn't that exposed? Remember that?
They had a trustee training. They had a trustee training event at the Ritz. Is what I think you're referring to, Tom. Which again is to the point that they groom their own trustees to be loyal to the entity rather than the people that are supposed to be safeguarding the entity on the behalf of. Corey, you may not know this, but a while back, you asked me about the ERLC. The ERLC became so odious that their the president of their trustee board, who I don't have a lot of alignment with, worked with the trustees and said, it's time for Brent Leatherwood to be fired. Went to fire Brent Leatherwood. Brent Leatherwood called Papa at Christianity Today, had him squall to his elite leaders, buddies with big platforms, and got the trustee president dismissed. So even when the trustees are not groomed into just complete yes man status, even when they are forced at such a crisis point as Brent Leatherwood's incompetence, they can't even hold the leaders accountable. The system is corrupted top to bottom, and it shows up in things like the trustees getting to go to the Ritz on missions giving dollars. And when they do find that they have to do something or feel like they need to do something, they can't get it done because establishment evangelicals intervene to stop actual accountability.
The story is actually a little bit worse than that. And since we're doing this, it can live on for everybody here. From what we've been able to piece together, after Indianapolis, where there was a pretty big vote to abolish the ERLC led by Tom Ascol, maybe 30, maybe 40% of the room, the trustees knew Brent Leatherwood needs to change. Something needs to change. And they communicated that to him. Well, then when Biden dropped out of the race, Brent Leatherwood took Democrat talking points and essentially cheered Joe Biden for doing what's in the best interest of the country, by stepping out of the race. And that was sort of the final straw. And so Kevin Smith got essentially verbal agreement from the executive committee of the trustee board. And this speaks to how messed up these trustee boards are, is there's another little board on top of the board that makes decisions for everybody else, that he needed to put Brent on leave. They needed to discipline Brent and bring him back into line. Okay, so then Kevin Smith drove from Florida to meet with Brent in his Nashville office to tell him he's going on leave until they can figure this out. And Brent sits in the office across the table from him and says, no, I'm not going on leave. You can't make me go on leave. So Kevin Smith, kind of being a little bit of a hothead, and I've seen this in person before, sort of fell, bottom backwards into doing the right thing and said, okay, well, if you're not going to go on leave, I'm the chairman of the board, you're fired. And so then Brent's, I think, is just like, okay, yeah, we'll see. So then Kevin walks out and tells the ERLC press person there, I fired Brent, put out a press release, I'm in charge. So they do that. And so then Brent calls Russell Moore and they spin up the whole campaign. And at the end of the day, who comes out on top? Brent Leatherwood and Kevin Smith, a black chairman of the board of the trustees is dismissed. So, I mean, it's even worse than you could possibly imagine.
Wow. I've said that a number of times, but because this is so incredible. I mean, this sounds like palace intrigue, which you just don't expect, to all of your points within the house of God, of course. And I being in the PCA, and again, I don't want to throw all the stones your way. Again, we've seen this, and I will say to each of you men's credit, it was when the PCA General Assembly started being attended by more men, including ruling elders. They were a huge part of us rooting out, some of the revoice and side, and we still have a ways to go. Don't get me wrong. We still have revoice and side B men that need to go, but it was ruling elders saying, I'll pay for a hotel. I'll take vacation time if I have to. I will come and be a part of what's going on at the General Assembly so that we can steer this thing back into a healthy position. And we, over the last 2 or 3 years, have started to claw our way back to at least having a fighting chance, where, again, we're not there. We let Greg Johnson slink away without defrocking him. We should have done that. I mean, and again, this will live on in my world too. So I mean, I'll probably catch heat for that from some people in my world. But if men who have a spine like the 4 of you men don't speak out, then this goes on forever. So thank you for being bold enough to say things publicly. My goodness, for starting entire organizations to help correct this problem. I know, again, I've listened to Russell Fuller talk about this on other podcasts and talk about what he's seen firsthand there at, in Kentucky. And so it's incredible to see how deep this really goes. I want to be, again, respectful of time. And Pastor Ascol, I know you said early on that you need to go right at about the hour point, and we're getting very close to that. If some of you other men want to stick around and kind of bat around some topics, I'm happy to do that. But Pastor Ascol, you can drop out whenever you need to. I want some practical, logistical steps that and we'll kind of take them in order. Each of you can have a turn, and Pastor Ascol, will start with you so you can dip out when you need to. Give me some practical steps that for the Southern Baptists that are watching, or maybe family members that are like myself, who are in another denomination but have loved ones that are still in the SBC. What are some things that we can encourage them to do, or that they could go and do right now that would help turn this thing around?
Well, certainly pray, because there's a God in heaven, and we ought to never forget that or take that for granted. But also talk to your church. Make sure that your church understands the issues, what's going on. We never have more than about 8% of Southern Baptist churches represented at an annual meeting. And so it's the people in the room, the messengers from the churches, that make the decisions. It's going to be in Dallas in June, so it's far more centrally located to more Southern Baptist churches than what we've seen the last couple of years. Go to Dallas, plan to go to Dallas. If your church has never sent messengers, which is highly likely because most have not, go and ask if you can be a messenger, and then get on the sbc.net website, figure out the best way that you can register as a messenger. and be in the room. Go knowing that it's a business meeting. It's not a vacation. Don't go to Six Flags. Just plan to be there and stay there for the votes. Watch for these kinds of issues. I fully expect there to be a motion to call for a task force that will be given authority to look into every entity, every agency, not just financially, but all of their activities and procedures for the last 10 to 15 years, and bring a report back to the convention. That thing needs to happen. And so if you're not in the room when that motion is made and debated, then you're not going to be able to impact that. And remember that, as we are often told from the platform, the local church in the Southern Baptist Convention is headquarters. And we need to remind the servants of those churches that headquarters is not happy. And that if they're not going to serve the will of the churches, then we're going to have to get new servants. So those kinds of things are practical. They're not too difficult. They do require some cost and some time, but that can happen. I would encourage churches to do this too. If you care about the SBC and you give to the cooperative program and you realize things are not going well, take cooperative program money and finance people going as messengers from your church. Because if things continue down the path that they are now, your cooperative program money will be increasingly spent to pay lawyers who are defending the convention against lawsuits that should never have come to pass, but have come to pass because of shoddy handling of matters that could have been handled by any kind of faithful pastors that were willing to get in a room, open the word of God and say, oh, here's what we're supposed to do. So whatever you got to do, get to Dallas with messengers who are willing to vote to be in the room for all the business sessions.
And I would add to network with other pastors. Try to, because some of the guys may not know, educate other pastors around you, get to know local SBC pastors within a, maybe make a goal of a 25, 30, 40-mile radius of where you are, and start calling some of those pastors up. And we, our church, because a lot of these churches, they can't afford to take anybody. It's close to us now because it's been in Dallas this year. But we would let pay for the way for other pastors of other churches to go. Not We didn't buy their vote. We just simply gave them a ride. And now we made sure they were going to vote a certain way. But anyway, they get in the van. But we want to get people there. And so not just your church, but we've got to mobilize better, and that's how we educate other pastors and take them and do everything that we can to help smaller churches get there. That's why a lot of them don't go, is they don't have the finances to be able to go.
Yeah. Hey, Corey, I'm going to have to bail out, man. Thanks so much for having me. Appreciate all you
Pastor Ascol.
guys. God bless.
God bless. Jeff, go ahead.
Oh, I was waving at Tom, but I do have a particular thought on this. My heart is the grassroots member of Southern Baptist Church, and that's where I think the solution is. William has kind of laid some of this out. Both of the brothers Tom have done so as well. But to be very practical about this, if you're a Southern Baptist Church member, you need to have regular conversations with your pastor. And I'm not telling you to harangue the guy, but you do need to cultivate a kind of godly obstinance. It would start with questions like, what's your impression of the North American Mission Board? Do you have any kind of financial relationships with the North American Mission Board? What do you know about what the North American Mission Board does? And what I'm generally driving at in spirit is, you need to let your pastor know that in his local everyday life, it's going to be a problem if he is either complicit in the kind of bought silence that the North American Mission Board does in various different ways, or he, is maybe more actively sort of working with them and taking money from them. He needs to understand that whatever benefits that those relationships are bringing him are actually costing him something in the local everyday life that he lives as well. I don't think that it's possible to overcome the North American Mission Board's financial manipulation unless members and churches say, I'm not okay with SBC, and I'm not going to let my pastor be okay with the state of the SBC on a regular basis. And I think that's the kind of accountability that can be gently cultivated that would actually make a tremendous difference in the way that people relate to the convention as a whole.
William?
2 points. First, reject the inner ring. And second, take extreme ownership. So first, Southern Baptists need to reject the inner ring. This primarily applies to pastors, but also to any other trustee and people who serve as trustees, people who are in our seminaries, professors, anybody who works for any of our entities. We need to stop compromising because we want a seat at the table. This phrase, of course, comes from an essay written by C.S. Lewis, in which he explained that the inner ring, which is this desire to be welcomed into the club, is one of the best ways that you make a good man become a bad man without even realizing it, because he wants the approval of his peers and the support and comfort of being part of the crew. And if there's anything about Southern Baptist life that I've realized over the last few years that I've been working much more actively in it, is that, man, people want to be in the club, right? So unfortunately today you're talking to a lot of people who aren't in the club, but may God give us 10,000 more SBC pastors who have no interest in being in the club, but are much more interested in faithfulness to God's word and our gospel mission. So 1, practically reject the inner ring. 2, take extreme ownership. This is what I mean by that. In concentric circles, first, take extreme ownership of the stewardship responsibility that your church has, because it is part of the Southern Baptist Convention. Make sure you're coming to the annual meeting. Yes. Make sure you're bringing as many messengers as you can. And to Tom's point about how it's hard for these small churches to afford to come, well, taking extreme ownership of this situation, if you are a pastor, means potentially going and doing some outside fundraising to make sure that you can cover the cost of 6 messengers if you get them. I go to a very small Southern Baptist church. I love it. I love my pastor. We got like 9 or 10 messengers from like a 70-person church last year, just based off of the giving ratio. We only sent 2, and I love my pastor. I'm not blowing him up in any way, but it'll be a huge lift for us to send 5 or 6 this year, and we're going to try to do that. But that's the numbers that get us to win. So 1, come; 2, bring all your messengers; and 2, extreme ownership and concentric circles working out includes talking to other Southern Baptist pastors in your local association and your state association. I can't contact all these people. I can tweet all day and post 1,000 articles on the Center for Baptist Leadership, but what it's going to take is you, as a Southern Baptist pastor, calling 15 of your buddies and saying, are you going to be in Dallas this year? Are you bringing all your messengers? And are you educated and equipped to vote on behalf of doctrinal fidelity and good governance in the Southern Baptist Convention? And if pastors will do that, then we can absolutely turn this whole thing around.
And Corey, what William just laid out is a model also within a congregation. If you're aware of what's happening in the Southern Baptist Convention, you can do the same thing with fellow church members. Are you aware of this issue? Can we talk about that? And you can, kind of foster it within your own congregation as well, which again, to my point earlier, I think that's what it's going to take to overcome some of the manipulation that we've been subject to.
Well, I will say, because I follow all of you men on social media, and for any of you that are watching and you don't follow all 4 of the men that have been on this panel tonight, follow them. Not only here, go to, a lot of them have websites or podcasts. Go get connected with these men, because they're championing a cause for you. I mean, they're doing a lot of the heavy lifting on behalf of your denomination. And so I beg you, get connected to these men, let them be a sounding board for you. And to what Jeffrey and William and Pastor Buck have all said, let them inform you, if nothing else. Stay abreast of what is going on. If a guy like me, who's in a different denomination, can pretty much know about most of everything that we've talked about tonight, because again, I find this important, then all of you that are currently in SBC churches have no excuse as to why you couldn't keep yourself a little more educated about what's going on and how in the world to get this turned around, because it absolutely can. I think Pastor Ascol's parting advice of, remember that again, God is in control. The church is his bride, and he will indeed purify her, because he promises to do so. Gentlemen, I am immensely grateful for your expertise, for your time. I would love to watch from the sidelines and cheer you guys on. Know that you have friends in other denominations. Please understand that all of us that know what time it is, we are rooting you on. We're praying for you. We support you. We're your brothers in Christ, even from other denominations. And so if there's ever anything that I can do personally, or that I can help rally other men in the PCA, please don't ever hesitate to reach out to me privately or here online. You have an absolute friend and a supporter in Corey Wing and Civically Minded. And I want to thank Brandon and the guys at Eschatology Matters for opening up their platform as well to get this a little broader audience. They're much, much bigger than I am. And so thank you, gentlemen, for doing that. I still, I owe you all my fidelity because you beat the absolute fire out of me in the bracket just a couple weeks ago. So, I mean, I got hammered in round 1 by Eschatology Matters. So, now I'm just their lackey. So that's how this works. If you guys didn't know, that was in the fine print of what Greg Moore does. So thank you, gentlemen, for what you've done. If you have people that have been watching, if you have questions, you're welcome to reach out to me or any of these men. And if you don't feel comfortable reaching out to them, reach out to me, and I will. I'll try to do some legwork on the back end. Thank you guys very much. God bless you, and go get them.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you, Corey. Good to see all you gentlemen.
Yes,
Thank
you
you,
too.
Corey.
Guys, thank you.